Hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about Bitcoin, this bounce that we have seen, and what this might mean going forward. So Bitcoin finally did something a little bit more interesting. We had been stuck in this horribly boring range here between, somewhere around 27.5K and then down into around 26K, just kind of bouncing around those levels. And now, just recently, we have gone ahead and bounced back to the upside, currently trading as I record this at about 28.2K. Now, one of the things that you will maybe notice or maybe have heard is that this looks like it could be a successful retest of the 200-week simple moving average for Bitcoin. You'll note that we wicked down there all the way in the middle of May. We went ahead and tested it for a couple days over here towards the end of May. And now we're going back to the upside. And the reason why this is a hopeful sign is that holding the 200-week moving average has oftentimes been quite a good thing for Bitcoin throughout its history. You'll notice it happening back here in 2015 twice, and then nice price action followed. Holding it as support at the bottom of the bear market in 2018, also more or less holding it there in the March 2020 crash. And then we had a failed attempt to reclaim it back here in July, which ultimately led to the lows of this bear market, at least so far, back here in November of 22. And now it looks like we might be trying to re-hold it as support, retest it, hold it before pushing off to the upside. So that is some good news. The other thing that is notable that's been happening more recently, we flip over to one of our models that we have here at the channel, our upside downside potential indicator, our risk indicator, looking at the short-term UDPI. So if you're not familiar with this model, it quantifies risk over the coming kind of days to weeks. So very short-term in its focus, the short-term version of this. Higher values are high risk, lower values are low risk. And one of the things that I've been talking about quite a bit over the last couple of months was how, in this push up that we've gotten into March over here, we've gotten a bit overextended on the short-term UDPI, similar levels to where we got, back here in January before we had this correction before moving up again. Same thing happened here. And one of the things that I said as we got up here was, we might expect some cooling off to happen for Bitcoin before being able to move back to the upside. And I explicitly noted that we might need to get back down to these levels that we've gotten to back here, right around -3, before being able to move back to the upside. And, lo and behold, kind of the start of this turnaround was right around -3, -3.02, pretty much right on the money there. And I'd actually been tweeting about this kind of all throughout. So here's a tweet I put out back in April where I was saying that Bitcoin was looking a little overextended, that it might need some time to cool off before being able to push back up in a more sustainable manner. Here's another tweet that I put out on May 3rd, where I was saying the same thing, that as things have been kind of going sideways, not really much exciting has been happening. One of the good signs was that risk was falling back down towards at those levels. Here's one from May 12th, where I was saying, Bitcoin is re-entering that general zone. And then, of course, here we are, catching a bounce right at that -3 level. So these were levels I was watching this entire time. And so far, so good. So far, it looks like we are catching a bounce off those levels. Now, does this mean we're just going to go off on another crazy rally like we saw over here? Well, certainly not guaranteed at all. Way too early to be able to say that that is with any kind of confidence. But so far, so good. So far, historical patterns are playing out again the way that they did the last two times. Something I'm going to be watching very closely. And the good news is that if we do go on another leg to the upside, look at all this room we have to work with now. Now that risk is cooled all the way back down to -3 on the short-term UDPI, even if we just do the same thing we did back here, get up to about 0.6, or over here, get up to about 1, we've got a lot of risk levels to move through before we get up there, which could, like these last two times, give Bitcoin quite a bit of room to move to the upside before it might start petering out. And so if we do get a rally that does take us up to these risk levels, I would not be surprised if that would coincide with the move back up to something closer to, for example, 40K. Now, still too early to say that that is, with any kind of confidence that that's going to happen, because, of course, the debt ceiling is still something that hasn't been fully resolved. There's a forming deal, but we don't know what's going to happen. Still some uncertainties in the market that could shift things around. But so far, so good. so far, we're seeing what we had been expecting, that getting back to these risk levels could provide that bouncing off point for price. Now we'll just see if price ends up following through. But so far, so good. Now, the other thing that's also notable about what's going on right now and what gives me hope is what's going on with Bitcoin's long-term UDPI. So this is the risk model we have for Bitcoin that cares about moves that play out over months to multiple months to years, much more macro in its focus. And you'll just notice, relative to the short-term UDPI, how much less volatile, the long-term one is. It's not worried about all those shorter-term movements on the order of, days to weeks. It cares about moves that play out over a much longer time horizon. And what you'll notice is that ever since we kind of made this big push up into these higher kind of ranges here, the long-term UDPI was a bit more elevated. It was up between about 0 and about -1, kind of bouncing around those areas. But only more recently does it start to really fall off more heavily. And that is a good sign, because if we do get another push up, like the short-term UDPI suggesting we might get at this point, what it means is now we have more longer-term upside potential in the tank. We have more longer-term upside potential that is plausible for us to go ahead and realize. So just like, this -3 or almost -4 and acted as the staging ground for this nice rally we had up through here, as we've kind of cooled off, and if we cool off a bit more here, that could act as a staging ground for a much bigger kind of movement. Instead of a short-term movement like we got up here that then had to cool off for quite a while, this could actually set the stage for a bigger move that could actually maybe get us back up to some of these higher levels that we haven't seen, since all the way back here in early 2022. So obviously it's not guaranteed, but when you're thinking about it as the conditions, what are the conditions right now? The conditions are such that a decent move to the upside is quite plausible from here. Obviously, there's no guarantee that those conditions are realized, but the conditions are there for that to happen. And that's in markets, that's often the way things work, is that there are going to be conditions that set up potential moves. It's not 100% guarantee that they're going to play out, but if they do, it gives you a sense of what the upside targets could be. And so that's where we're in a situation right now, where the conditions look good for a decent move to the upside. And so now we're going to have to see if Bitcoin ends up going ahead and doing that. If broader conditions don't interfere, if we don't get some shock in macro markets or something like that, and if that enables these conditions to go ahead and play out. But the conditions are certainly there, like they were, for example, back over here before this whole thing began. That's one thing that I also wanted to mention here. Now, the final thing I wanted to just bring up as well was looking at our market direction classifier, or MDC. So this is a model, it's a trend model, where if price is above this blue line, the critical level of the market direction classifier, that's bullish, and that tends to enable these massive rallies to the upside. If you dip below it, that tends to be bearish, and then you can see notable drops in price falling off of that. And more recently, what I've been noting, and I've been talking about this on Twitter as well, is that we had a clear break above the MDC critical level all the way back in here in January. Came back and more or less held it as support. We dipped a little bit below it. We basically held the critical level as support back here in March. Came above, broke back below it back here in middle of May. Ended up getting rejected by it a couple times from the upside, so basically held it as resistance a couple times. But now we've broken above it as well. And so that's where, the possibility, again, conditions, where, last time we saw a clear break above was back here. And then here, we basically held a support, but we did, break out from the underside of it up through here to a similar level that we did here. And this is what happened the last two times. Could it be the same this time? So to kind of wrap up my thoughts on the market, there's a lot of confluence coming together to suggest the conditions could be there for a continued rally to the upside. And that's number one, that we held the 200-week moving average as support, or at least so far it looks like we might have held it as support. That's one sign for the bulls. The other is that short-term risk for Bitcoin is back down at levels that have enabled big rallies to the upside in recent history. Another point for the bulls, in my opinion. And also long-term risk has been cooling off, which might allow for a more sustainable move to the upside. Again, another point for the bulls. And again, clearing a clear breakout above the MDC critical level could again be one of those conditions. That's another point in the favor of the bulls. So obviously, we're going to have to watch this to see what happens. Nothing is ever guaranteed in markets or in crypto. Certainly, this could just be, a fake out blip that then reverses to the downside. But when I'm just looking at the data across all the models, My view is that the conditions are more favorable for upside than downside. So not financial advice, should make your own opinion, make of these data as you will, but that's what I'm looking at right now. All right, if you like the content, or subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. Put a lot of updates, better indicators, and more over there. And check out our site, polaritydigital.io, link in the description, where you can view these models live and more.